All right, so I want to make a video updating everyone. Getting right into it. Canada 99,515 cases, 8,213 dead. Alberta 48 new cases yesterday, up to 486 active cases, 38 in the hospital, 356. So we, yeah, again, 8,000 tests a day. We continue to hover around that number. And the first thing to point out is that I did see numbers yesterday. I forget where, so I didn't pull it up, but and I believe it was from the official government numbers. I always read through those when they come out, usually around 4 or 5 o'clock. And then they have shown that the percent of people testing positive continues to hover around that 0.5 to 1% mark. So there has been, even though there's an increase in cases, there's an increase in active cases, not by that much, but it's still somewhat significant. The percentage of people testing positive has not gone up. So, in other words, there's no reason to be worried. There's no reason to be worried because the government is simply just testing more people. The reason why people are so up in arms is that in their mind, someone who's asymptomatic who gets tested and tested positive is something to worry about, but that person not getting tested isn't something to worry about. In reality, they're the same thing. The only difference is whether or not the government and people are aware of them having it, right? And the thing to point out too that I've pointed out is that we know that asymptomatic people do not spread nearly as easily as we originally thought. The original thought was we had all these asymptomatic people that were just spreading it like wildfire, and even the WHO has came out and said no, that's not the case. Asymptomatic people very unlikely to, I mean, not impossible, but they don't spread it nearly as much as people who are symptomatic, which is just getting into the whole mask thing. There's this big push to make masks mandatory, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense whatsoever for the simple reason that a lot of masks are faulty, which means they don't do anything anyway. I mean, look at the entire first batch we got from China, I believe, was entirely faulty. The other problem too is that some people get terrible headaches from wearing them too long. It will make it harder to breathe, which is going to cause more stress on your immune system and your entire body in general. So masks aren't this foolproof thing that a lot of people are making it out to be. Do they help for people that are sick? Absolutely. And that's what I've been saying all along is that masks do provide some benefit, but they're not this magical cure. And if they were this magical cure, then why didn't we do it off the start? Why didn't we just say, yeah, we don't have to close anything down as long as everyone wears a mask? Why didn't we say that? And the thing too is that most of the people who think that people should be forced to wear them are the same people that would have believed and touted the government's lies, and we know they're lies because they literally admitted they were wrong. And then, oh, masks don't work, borders don't work. Those are the same people that 2 or 3 months ago would have told you that oh, masks don't work, we shouldn't wear masks. And then now it's we should be forced to wear a mask. So again, it just goes to show that these people that believe that are just useful idiots, and I don't mean to be mean, but they are useful idiots in that they're not right. If they were, they wouldn't have. I mean, and if they are right, it's just by flat out chance. It's the only reason they're right is that they blindly believe whatever the government tells them. If they are right, which they're not, but if they were, that's the only reason they're right. There's no science behind what they're saying. They're just blindly believing what the government tells them. Um, so that is kind of that. And again, I believe George Floyd was killed like 3 weeks ago. So there's been protests going on for about 3 weeks, and yet there's still no clear uptick in cases. Now, again, the problem too is that you have all these people, and I know I've just pointed out, but I wanted to reiterate it. There is not an increase in the percentage of people testing positive. The only reason there's an increase in cases is that we're testing more people. It is very little to do, if any, with the protests. I personally believe that the protests account for a small percentage of cases that otherwise wouldn't have happened. But it's so insignificant that even if you have tens of thousands of people protesting in hundreds of cities across the world, and in those cities you get an extra 100 cases, and they're largely asymptomatic, largely people that don't have anything to worry about, because if you have serious medical conditions and you went to one of these protests, or you're 80 years old and you went to one of these protests, to be perfectly honest, you're a complete and utter idiot. And you're asking for whatever negative ramifications come from it. If you are perfectly healthy, you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the rioting for sure. I think that what they're protesting is largely not complete non-issue, but it's not something that we should be as up in arms about as they pretend. So yeah, um, getting into the U.S. numbers again, I've been pointing those out lately because it's a much greater sample size, and it's a better. Not to mention too, the protests happen on a much larger scale in the States than they did in Canada, so it would be safer to take their numbers as a is there a is there a a link between the protests and the increase in cases. And yesterday they did have quite a few numbers. They had 27,000, but they've still had days higher than that. They have actually had multiple days higher than that. A handful of days very close to that within the last few weeks. So it's just one day. I mean, if for me, the only way that I would be confident in saying that there is a link between the protests and an increase in cases is if they went over like 30, at least 30,000, probably 35,000. And again, we're already well over 2 weeks out from that, which means it's almost 0% chance it's going to happen. That's very unlikely. So again, we're at the point to where we know that there's no link between opening things up and an increase in cases. There's nothing to worry about. And all the people that are still wanting to keep anything, lockdowns aside from the most mild restrictions, some restrictions in nursing homes, um, suggesting older people who aren't in nursing homes stay home, that kind of stuff. I mean, recommending people wear masks, especially if they interact with a lot of people. But people should not be forced, and for the simple reason that it doesn't make that much of a difference to begin with. And the other problem with masks too, like I mentioned too, is that they only work, assuming that you have a fully functional mask, which is hit and miss given the fact that we get a lot of this stuff from China, is that if you don't touch your face. I mean, this is the one thing Tam pointed out that she was right about. If you're constantly touching your face and adjusting things, it's pointless. It's pointless to wear a mask. And at the time, I think she was very wrong in that that was still in March and April. Like that, it wasn't that warm out. Now we're in summer now, and it's very warm, which means that people are outside or in gyms too. Is the one I is a good example. Is that people are going to be sweating. They're going to be, when you're in a gym, you're working out, your heart rate's already up. You're having a tough time breathing, at least harder than normal. People are going to be doing that. I've seen multiple videos of this of people that their gyms have reopened, and I think it was in entirely different countries. I think it was in Europe, and it was one of the gyms where you have to wear a mask, and everybody was adjusting it. The guy making the video was constantly adjusting it. They're taking it off in between sets, and you could see people in the background doing the same thing. So forcing people to wear a mask is one of the stupidest ideas I think I've ever heard. Should again recommend, yeah, but forcing retarded because it's not going to work. So the big story out of the news over the last few days, or I think it's even been a little longer, but yesterday was um, the cop that killed that guy in Atlanta was charged for some crazy reason, and I'll get into that a little more later. But the Atlanta police are having very high numbers of officers just flat out quit. And some of the precincts in Atlanta, I don't even believe were functional yesterday. I believe that the whole city was running on about half of the normal amount of officers that they normally had out. And this is something that I fully support. Technically, I don't believe in the concept of a state run police force. Technically, the problem is that completely disbanding the police force in the way that the Black Lives Matter people want to do it would result in massive amount of chaos. And I strongly support this because I believe that these people that, again, they've continuously promoted policies that do not work, that hurt people. Their solutions to problems only makes the problems worse. And we're at the point where the only way people are going to learn is if they learn through the hard way, basically. So yeah, I'm fully on board this kind of stuff. I think every cop in Canada and especially the States, especially in these big cities. I think a lot of the more rural ones are a lot better because they know people more on a personal basis, and I think that it's a better in both ways. But cops in big cities should, again, if you can get another job, quit. If you can get another job, quit. Um, Even if you're well off financially, you could, gladly take a year off and find something else down the road, quit. And for all the ones that can't do that, I would urge them to strike. I would urge them to strike because people don't realize that I think that a privately run police system could easily work as well as the current system. I would say even better in a lot of ways. The problem is that you have to slowly transition towards it. You can't just completely shut things down overnight because it needs to be well planned out. And the problem is that there would be chaos. Like, and this is why, again, I don't support violence, but um, I'm perfectly fine with letting people live with the ramifications of their poor decisions. And if that means violence, that means violence. And the problem is that gun ownership in the States is at an all-time high. I mean, last month, I believe they had the most amount of background checks in their history run. I believe they had like 15 million, and I think about a third of those were first-time gun owners. So if they disband the police and some of the and riots break out, people will be, I think that more people will die of that than die of COVID because you'll have people rioting, looting. There will be no police, so it's basically lawless, which means a lot of people are going to die. So defunding the police in the way that the left and the Black Lives Matter people want to do it is an absolutely terrible idea, and it's not even popular either. I mean, the polls I've seen show that more people want more police than want to get rid of the police. So it's not a popular position. Um, and this is the problem too, that a lot of people out there are pretending that it's a popular position when in reality it isn't. So, and the other big thing to point out too is that again, this guy was charged and the guy was drunk. The guy, I believe, had a fairly lengthy rap sheet. He he resisted arrest. He stole the cop's taser and he tried to use it on him. If that's not grounds for using lethal force, I don't know what is. Like, I don't know what is. And this is the problem that, I mean, this is the other problem going forward too, is that cops are already walking on eggshells when it comes to dealing with the black community. I mean, if I was a cop and I'm doing the rounds in a black, neighborhood, I wouldn't even be paying attention. I'd be trying to get in and out of there as fast as I possibly can. And most cops are doing that nowadays, and it's only making the problem worse too. Again, it's only making the problem worse too. And this is why I care so much about the issue, because what's going to happen is that the problem that they perceive is going to continue to get worse because of policies they've supported, and because they're too stupid or too proud to admit that they were wrong, they're going to continue to double down on their stupid positions, which is just going to make the problem worse and worse. And the people that take the blame are people like me, because we're the ones pointing out we're the ones pointing out the actual solutions to the problem, and because we don't think that it's everything's more racism, were raked over the coals and vilified. And then again, the cycle just continues over and over and over again. So, and this is from Jack Posobiec. He says 2 weeks ago, the same DA charged officers with aggravated assault for use of a taser. Today, he says a taser's not a threat. Again, this is the same thing, literally 2 weeks. Again, this is just flat out. Um, Again, this is racism in general too. Like, if this was the other way around, if this was a white cop on a white suspect, if this was a black cop on a white suspect, even if it was a black cop on a black suspect, I mean, maybe not. But especially the white cop on white suspect and black cop on white suspect, nobody would care. Nobody would care. And then this is the thing about racism too, that blacks have the privilege of whenever that they are perceived to have suffered a racial incident, that it's amplified to the nth degree. And this is, again, the one thing about society that literally is racist, and that most of the things, in fact, I would argue almost all the things in society that objectively are racist nowadays, hurt whites. And again, it's objective. That is objectively true. I've made several videos about that. Stuff like this too. When a white guy gets unfairly killed by the police, name one time in history where you've heard the mainstream media where that's been a national news story. Name one time. It never has been. Even though white people are more likely, even as a percentage of population, to be killed by police. You know, the fact that diversity quotas and all this diversity hiring exists, hurts white. So again, all of the stuff that objectively can be measured nowadays when it comes to racism helps blacks. So again, they're pretending that a problem does racism exist against blacks to some degree? Yeah, obviously, but it's not disproportionate. It's not disproportionate. This is just where society is going. That there's different rules for different sets of people, and when you have that, chaos will ensue. Chaos will ensue inevitably. This is from Peter Schiff. Now, again, this is kind of piggybacking on what I've been talking about. He says, so far in 2020, 97% of the people shot to death by police were men. This gender disparity has persisted for years, and yet are the police racist and sexist? Perhaps a nearly exclusive depiction of males as criminals in movies has created an unconscious systematic bias against men. Again, the reason why is that people understand, yeah, men commit more crime than women. This is why stuff like this happens. But there is still, again, people talk about the black white sentencing gap, even though the male female sentencing gap is much larger. So again, if anything, the justice system and the police are much more sexist against men than they are racist against black. And that's objectively true. Again, it's flat out objectively true. The sentencing gap between men and women is much larger than between whites and blacks. Much larger. 97% of people shot to death by police are men. Again, why isn't that number 50-50? Well, again, everybody knows that number isn't 50-50 because men commit more crime. Now, is it almost double the amount of it? Or sorry, is it that much more? Who knows? I've never seen the exact numbers, but the problem being is that if you're going to argue that blacks are unfairly targeted by police because they're black, you better be willing to talk about the sexism that exists in the system. And until people are willing to talk about that, I don't care about your made up or largely made up racism. Largely made up because some exist. It does exist to some degree, but it's largely a fantasy. So anyway, again, a very good point that I've pointed out before, and it's very articulate. And getting back into the whole virus thing, this is from Clay Travis. Now he points out huge virus study in Switzerland. One in every 18,000 people under the age of 50 who got the virus died. That's a 99.994% survival rate. Again, the numbers continue to pour in every time we get new updated numbers. The death rate, the seriousness of the virus goes down. I pointed this out ad nauseum. It's so boring at this point that it seems like you literally could have a 1 in a billion chance of dying from the virus, and yet you'd still have a decent percent of the population that's all going to be all hot and paranoid about it. And again, it just goes to show just how easy people are to believe propaganda. And again, this guy literally is an epidemiologist. He's literally quoting an epidemiologist. So yeah, it really, really, really makes no sense. It really makes no sense. And it's like I say too, I've been on the record saying multiple times that by the time this is all said and done, the death rate for healthy people under the age of like 50 to 60 will be lower than the flu. And again, we're looking at numbers here that show that. So again, I don't want to take one study as definitive proof, but one study is definitely some evidence to point towards that conclusion. So I'll continue to keep an eye out for more stuff. And the last thing I wanted to talk about here is a classic mainstream media manipulation, just flat out garbage, in that they say far right activists gather around statues in London despite warning from police. And this guy responds, the media has moved so far to the left, they classify you as a far right activist if you care about your country and want to preserve its history. And again, that's where the mainstream media is. And it's very unfortunate, but that's where it is. And anybody still watching them, I don't have words for you. And if most people probably watching this don't, but if you know people, you gotta knock some sense into them. Not physically, but talk to them. Like, again, the problem is most people, there's nothing you can say to change their mind, but there is some people. Like, there is some people, and this is the problem too, that they label everyone they disagree with as far right. And again, at some point, far right isn't going to mean anything anymore. But it's same thing as a racist. They kind of pivoted from racist to far right because racist kind of lost its meaning. So look out for them to pivot away from far right to some other buzzword within the next few years. Because again, everybody they disagree with is far right. Again, if you're to the left of a sorry, if you're to the right of a socialist, then you're far right in their mind. But on the other hand, the same people argue that socialists, the NDP and the Liberals in Canada, they're just to the left of center. They're moderate left. Again, these people are so insane it's not even funny. Like they're so insane it's not even funny. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. Got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations with the very least. Just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last thing, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.